It's a very special evening because we're inaugurating a prize. National Conservatives have a statement of principles, but we never before had a prize. It's called the Beaconsfield Prize, and our recipient, our very first inaugural recipient, is Professor Ryszard Legutko from Poland, the author of The Demon and Democracy, and he will be introduced by Reno. What I will say is explain a little bit about the prize. I'll try to make it very short. Beaconsfield is the home of Edmund Burke. He was offered to become the Lord of Beaconsfield, actually the Earl of Beaconsfield, and it's an honor he turned down. It was offered to him incredibly by George III, who really could not stand him because of Edmund Burke's position on the American Revolution. The position was very simple. Edmund Burke basically believed that the men and women here, the Americans, were English men and women, many of them English lawyers, trained in common law, and they were simply right and the king was wrong. They were not the conquered people, they were his colonists. And Edmund Burke just kept saying, be careful what you wish for because you stand against liberty and we are the ones who took it there. So this is not a fight we should be fighting. So obviously he did not make himself into a friend of George III. But then he wrote the Reflections on the Revolution in France. And George III, probably by then a little less mad, decided that the man is actually a traditionalist and a faithful servant, both of God and king, and actually decided to offer peerage to him. What's interesting is that Burke turned it down, and he never really recovered from the tragedy of losing his son. And as you can imagine, accepting a hereditary honor when you're dealing with the grief of the loss of your child is not really something that's easy to say yes to, so he was no longer interested in that honor. The person who did take it was Benjamin Disraeli, arguably, at least I would argue, the first National Conservative Prime Minister of Great Britain. He was also a Jewish Prime Minister. He was also a Prime Minister who opened up the Conservative Party to basically to working men. He made the Tory Party, the Conservative Party, the party of patriots, and not the party of the well and high-born. So a very, very national conservative idea. The nation is the biggest tent there is. If you love it, come on in, you're welcome. So the first, because we are the Edmund Burke Foundation, we thought Beaconsfield is the perfect name that we give for our prize. And the person who will introduce our inaugural recipient, Professor Legutko, will be Reno. First things.
It is a difficult microphone, isn't it? Well, Ryszard Legutko is one of the most important voices of national conservatism. He's the author of 8 books, at least by my count, and more essays and commentaries than I can count. One of them, The Demon and Democracy, Anna just mentioned, has been extraordinarily influential. And I remember meeting a Capitol Hill staffer some years ago who told me with breathless enthusiasm, he said, reading it was like a revelation. And he confessed that in 2 days' time, he read it twice. Demon and Democracy, I recommend to anyone who hasn't read it. Now, Ryszard's output is so impressive that it's easy to forget that he's also a man of action. Born in the People's Republic of Poland, as a student and as a young professor, he joined in dissident ventures in those unhappy years of actually existing socialism. And after the Soviet tanks left Poland, Ryszard saw a new ideology taking hold in his native land. Already in the 1990s, with a Burkean prophetic insight, he recognized the totalitarian temptations of an end-of-history liberalism, one that we're afflicted with certainly to this day. In this regard, in recognizing with foresight this danger, he was like his fellow countryman, the great John Paul II, who warned of similar dangers in the 1990s. And this concern drew Ryszard into politics. In 2006, he was elected to the Polish Senate and soon became deputy speaker. In 2007, he served as Poland's Minister of Education and then as Secretary of State in the administration of President Lech Kaczynski. In 2014, Ryszard was elected as a member of the European Parliament, and from there he also rose to leadership, in this case, leadership of the European Conservative and Reformist grouping in the European Parliament. Now, Ryszard has been an outspoken critic of our technocratic masters, and I urge you to listen to his 2023 State of the European Union speech on behalf of the ECR group. He recites a litany of failures by the Brussels elite, and he calls out the EU leadership for their blatant violations of democratic and legal standards. I think it's fair to say that Ryszard has never kowtowed to the globalist elite. Now, of his political adventures, I really can say very little, for I have known him as a man of thought rather than a man of action. And in his books, in his essays, in his lectures, and in his conversations with me, he's offered wise counsel. His formulations are hard-hitting and often humorous. He writes with the mordant irony that is nurtured when one lives under obligatory lies. While reading The Demon of Democracy, I laughed out loud on the formulation, lumpen intellectuals. It's a great formulation. It's the perfect term for the sorts of people who write for the Atlantic magazine. I think of Anne Applebaum as in the Wikipedia entry for, there'll be a picture of her for the Wikipedia entry, lumpen intellectual. Now, Ryszard has been persecuted for crimes against today's liberal pieties, legally persecuted in his own country. But I think it's fair to say that he did not set out to be an anti-liberal. He is devoted to the traditions of a free society, much as Edmund Burke was. A mixed constitution, the rule of law, freedom of association, and most of all, I would submit, he's committed to the happy zones of domestic life, friendship, civic intercourse, and intellectual inquiry that is unburdened by the all-consuming political moralism of our time. Yet he recognized that a new tyranny has been running rampant since the end of the Cold War. It is what Ryszard calls a super theory, an untampered, unrestrained, and domineering liberalism that has been asserted, imposed, and enforced with a vigor that would make the old communist commissars of old jealous. And indeed, The Demon of Democracy, that book, has such great power because Ryszard catalogs the damning parallels between communism and liberalism. Both are utopian. Liberalism, no less than communism, claims to be on the side of history. Both practice an anti-democratic vanguardism. Only a privileged few, it turns out, are the proper custodians of the future. Both dissolve morality into a struggle for political power. On this, Lenin was clear. He wrote, "Morality is entirely subordinate to the interests of class war." Now, John Stuart Mill was much more coy, but what he said amounts to the same thing. Here's John Stuart Mill. "A ruler full of the spirit of improvement a very dangerous spirit indeed. A ruler full of the spirit of improvement is warranted in the use of any expedients that will attain an end, perhaps otherwise unattainable. Essentially the same thing. Politics is more important than morality. Both communism and liberalism repress dissent. Like the old communist regime, the open society does not have critics, it only has enemies. As the communists once did, today's liberals now do, which is to label their opponents as fascists. Both twist and pervert language. Reading Ryszard's cutting analysis, I'm reminded of a sign I once saw outside an Episcopal church in Seattle. And that sign read, "We include everyone who includes everyone." Well, that turns out to be a pretty exclusive club. Those who champion diversity invariably impose the same uniform ideology. As Ryszard has observed on many occasions, liberalism's list of thought crimes is far more extensive than the old list in communist times. Finally, both communism and liberalism are secular ideologies. This is probably the most damning similarity. They are anti-metaphysical and hostile to transcendence. And as a consequence, they identify biblical religion, which is, after all, the engine of transcendence in Western culture. They identify biblical religion as their great adversary. So I was recently chatting with Ryszard after a pleasant dinner in New York some months ago. And I asked him what he thought was the greatest error of modern times. His answer was immediate. He said, Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach. It is actually, I couldn't agree more. And that reads, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. It is actually the most corrupting sentence in the modern era. Again, communism and liberalism converge on this debasement of the intellect. Both are, in fact, political religions. Rather than contemplation, we have political action. Now, of course, Ryszard has held political office, and he's criticized modern political theories, and so he, too, would like to change the world, and we should all want to effect change. Our goal should be to make the West less ideologically fevered. We should allow prudence to govern rather than gimcrack theories and utopian dreams. But change is for naught if we fail to champion the old loyalties. I think this is the crucial theme in his work. To champion the old loyalties, the decencies, and the pieties that, in fact, make freedom possible. To know and cherish the truth is the first and most important task before us. We serve the truth, we do not use it. It's a crucial distinction between us and the left. Now, this spirit of gratitude for our families, for our communities, for our nations, and for our God, is what anchors national conservatism. And Ryszard has played a founding role in our movement. A decade or more before many of us woke up to the fact that the West is being threatened by rampant globalism and a flesh-eating liberalism, Ryszard was sounding clear warnings. You know, a book from 1993 with the wonderful title, I Dislike Tolerance. 1993, he saw it coming, the repressive tolerance of our time. I'm very grateful to Ryszard. He helped me see the banal mediocrity of the world created by the ascendant liberalism of our time. Under its dominion, we have a gutter-dwelling mass culture, historical amnesia, national deracination, and institutional collapse. And all of this is championed by pontificating midwits as the part and parcel of the blessings of liberty. As I said, lumpen intellectuals. As Ryszard has charted the way forward, he has underscored for me the happy paradox of freedom. Without devotion, we are slaves to our fickle desires, and we're easy marks for those who wish to manipulate, threaten, and intimidate us. To be sure, we need clear-sighted critiques of the failures of the ideologies of our time. But more than critique, we need love, loyalty, and gratitude in order to escape the tyranny of liberalism. And he has been the great voice for that love, loyalty, and gratitude. I present to you, therefore, the recipient of the first Beaconsfield Prize for Distinguished Public Service and Letters. He is a man who is among the most implacable and articulate opponents of today's liberal regime. And he has fought against its false promises, not because he's an enemy of liberty, but because he is freedom's truest and most faithful friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryszard Legutko.
What an evening. Ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? Well, I feel so happy. I want to thank Berg Foundation, Joram, Anna, Chris, all those good people who have honored me with this award. And special thanks to Rusty for his laudation, very generous, too generous, I would say, but I'm very, very grateful for this splendid form of appreciation of my work. Let me also say that I'm happy and proud of being part of this movement of people who not only have withstood the onslaught of insanity, but have grown into a considerable force. The considerable force, let me repeat, in case of doubt, consult the Belgian authorities. I want to seize this opportunity and, as it is proper on such occasion, share with you some thoughts on a more general problem. I'm about to leave the European Parliament after 15 years. I've been in politics longer than that. I think I've acquired some first-hand knowledge about politics, about power. So this period was not intellectually barren for me. And if you allow me, I will take about 15 minutes more of your time to tell you about one of the things I learned in politics. And the subject I have chosen for tonight is politics and the lie. Well, in politics, there are lies and there are lies. I did not have any sexual relations with that woman. That's one type of a lie. Well, factually, it was false. The opposite was true. But there is also a different kind of lies. Now let me make a big jump from Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky to Joseph Stalin. One of his memorable sayings was, "Life has become better, life has become happier." And he said it at the beginning of the Great Terror era, with hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people arrested, put on trial on false charges, executed, tortured, sent to labor camps. And many Soviet citizens repeated the slogan, and some of them, we do not know how many believe it to be true. And the number of those who did believe it to be true was not negligible. And more or less at the same time, a Soviet composer wrote a song which soon became the unofficial anthem of the Soviet Union. And it started with, "Large is my native land," and the stanza ended with, "I know of no other country in which man breathes so freely." And again, millions of Soviet citizens believed in what they sang. But not only the Soviet citizens. Among the believers, there were millions of communists worldwide, and including quite an army of fellow travelers. What is the characteristic of this type of lie? For one thing, it is so monstrous that it leaves you speechless, just knocks you off your feet, and it blows your mind. Your first reaction would be twofold. First, there is no way anyone in his right mind could believe it. And then the person who says it must suffer from some incurable, profound deficiency, being unable to tell the difference between right or wrong, between good and evil. And yet thousands, sometimes millions of people accept such lies. Good people, not necessarily evil people. Why do they do it? Well, my answer is because the nature of this lie is systemic. Once you accept the system, you accept its logic. Once you accept the logic, you accept the conclusions, you accept the consequences. To give an example, whoever accepts a certain theory of European history will have no problems in acquiescing to the thesis that the 1789 revolution in France was a great triumph of liberty. Unfortunately, mankind's history is full of such cases. I'm not the first person to see the lie as a backbone of totalitarian or despotic regime. Several decades ago, a Polish philosopher, Leszek Kołakowski, wrote precisely an essay precisely on this, and fairly recently, Rod Dreher published a book which tells about what we can learn from the people who refused to live by lies under the totalitarian regime. How threatening is the lie today? Surely, some would say, surely, given today's spirit of criticism, rampant skepticism, pluralistic media, a systemic lie is impossible. Yes, people can and do lie about what they did or did not do, what they said or did not say, but there is no way you can fool the masses of people or major institutions. But oddly enough, you can. And the systemic lie is as entrenched in our society as ever. The most recent example is my own country. Having been viciously attacked under the conservative government, it became a target of the European institutions, which launched punitive measures against it for what they called a breach of the rule of law. After last year's parliamentary elections, as you know, the government fell into the hands of the liberal left parties, and guess what? Almost overnight, Poland came to resemble, Poland, then a well-functioning country, came to resemble a banana republic. Not that since that time, law has been somehow strained or unfairly applied. Law has been violated. Statutory laws and the Constitution raped, if you want to use a more emphatic word, all in order to wipe out any legitimate presence of the Conservative Party in public space. This in itself would not have been shocking had it not been for the general endorsement of these policies. And the endorsement was almost universal. The EU praised the new government and almost immediately lifted the punitive procedures. And other international institutions followed suit, issued laudatory or sometimes more cautious sort of wait-and-see statements. The West European and American politicians could not conceal their satisfaction. By the way, the US ambassador to Poland, a rather despicable figure, had been from the beginning supporting the left liberal parties against conservative government. But this is not all. Not only do all those countless institutions and innumerable media support the abolition of all legal restraints to deal with the political position, but they call it restoring the rule of law. Restoring the rule of law by turning a country into a banana republic. If this is not a systemic lie, I do not know what is. The obvious question is, why lie about Poland? Why lie about Hungary? Why lie about national conservatism, for that matter? And again, the answer is sadly simple. For some time, we have been living in a world of mendacity. Or to be precise, we have been living in a world that has generated a mendacious language, and we have been indifferent to or unaware of its mendacity. The fact is that most of the buzzwords that we use today to interpret the world or to express our preferences, our opinions, most of those concepts, democracy, pluralism, freedom, diversity, dialogue, tolerance, have come to mean the opposite of what they actually mean. Today's usage resembles more and more the practice that George Orwell described in his books. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Now, in today's discourse, democracy is not a system where the voters choose their representatives in accordance with the established and fair rules. Democracy, as it is understood today, is a rule of the parties that are by definition entitled to rule, irrespective of the electoral results. The rule of the conservative parties, and the conservative parties are by definition not entitled to rule, is called autocracy. So it does not matter what the government does, what matters is what party constitutes the government. The essential thing is to remember the basics of today's discourse, the distinction between democratic parties and the populist parties. Let us know the career of the adjective populist as a word of condemnation. Again, acquiring a meaning that has nothing to do with the original one. Populism today means having the views that are unacceptable to the parties and groups that are entitled to rule, no matter how sound and how legitimized democratically they are. So whatever the democratic parties do is by definition democratic. Whatever the populist party does is by definition undemocratic or autocratic. And if the Democratic Party closes a populist party within a cordon sanitaire, or persecutes a populist politician, it becomes even more democratic. And if the populist party exercises power given to it by the voters, it is autocratic. I'm not quibbling with words. This logic accounts for the fact that from 30 to 50% of Europe's population, depending on the country, of course, have no real representation in the European institutions. And if they do, then the representatives are surrounded by the cordon sanitaire. And they have no say in anything that is happening in those institutions. And this is openly and explicitly called the triumph of democracy. As far as I know, neither Freedom House nor any such organizations have ever made a big deal about this. Yes, occasionally someone drops a euphemistic term, a democratic deficit, but this is of no consequence at all. The same logic applies to the concept of pluralism. Pluralism does not mean today a situation where there is a plurality of opinions and a widespread spectrum of media. For pluralism to hold, two conditions must be fulfilled. First, that all parties and all people have more or less the same correct views. And second, that all those parties and all those people declare themselves to be in favor of pluralism. In the European Parliament, about 70% of the deputies have more or less the same correct views. The remaining 30% are populist, ipso facto, anti-pluralism. So the logical conclusion is, the moment 100% of the deputies have more or less the same correct views, the European Parliament will achieve full and perfect pluralism. And one could decipher the actual meanings of other concepts I mentioned. Take diversity. Everyone here knows. All bodies in charge of diversity at the universities, corporations, and governments are in fact responsible for imposing homogeneity or dialogue. Most of us have noticed that when people use the word dialogue, they really mean monologue, or even worse. When the European Commission said it was conducting a dialogue with Poland's conservative government, it meant bullying, cheating, and blackmailing. And finally, a short comment. I could go on, but I want to make it as brief as possible. A short comment on another mendacious concept. Open society. An open society is not a society that is open to various groups and creeds, but it is a society in which a fierce war is being waged against the enemies of an open society. And the enemies are legion, they are profoundly evil, and the present they pose is apocalyptic. It is almost like in the revelation of St. John. Let me quote, "A monster having 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its horns there were 10 crowns, and upon its crowns were the names of blasphemy." So here's a sample of today's crowns with the names of blasphemy. Misogyny, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, Eurocentrism, phallocentrism, logocentrism, binarism, populism, white supremacy, nationalism, xenophobia, hate speech, far-right, Euroscepticism, misgendering, bigotry, fascism, global warming denial, and so on and so on. Almost every day, someone discovers a new sin and a new hideous head with new hideous horns. As you can see, the more open the open society becomes, the more hydras it has to fight. In other words, for the open society to exist and grow, we need more and more policing and self-policing, as well as more and more censorship and self-censorship. To conclude, are we already in Orwell's world where the language is utterly corrupted? Perhaps not. But whoever has eyes to see will certainly see it coming. The most pernicious aspect of it is that it is no longer perceived as a lie. The use of the mendacious language is even considered a mark of the nobility of character, of decency, honesty, respectability. And I admit all this makes a rather depressing view. However, one can draw a more solacing conclusion. If so much of modern world is built on a lie, then the strategy to oppose it is very simple. We should not lie. We should not participate in the lie. Is that enough? Well, possibly not. But in a world of omnipresent propaganda and deafening cacophony, we tend to estimate the power of true word, the power of logos, as described by the ancient philosophers. Logos as a word of truth is strong, is powerful. And we should not underestimate the power of logos. After all, our civilization was created and developed on the power of logos. And we have to use it as much as we can, even if we sometimes tend to think somewhat despairingly that it looks like a Sisyphean task. Thank you.